Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 12th Annual Creative Conference at the Atlanta Film Festival. My name is Sue-Ellen Chitunya. I'm a board member for the Atlanta Film Society. I'm also a filmmaker based out of Los Angeles. We're thrilled to welcome you to this panel on everything sound.
Hi, we're happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 12th Annual Creative Conference at the Atlanta Film Festival. My name is Sue-Ellen Chitunya. I'm a board member for the Atlanta Film Society. I'm also a filmmaker based out of Los Angeles. We're thrilled to have this conversation today with Bryan Parker and Alexandra Fehrman, who have collectively worked together for about 5 years. Their collective work includes CODA, If Beale Street Could Talk, and Underground Railroad. So we're going into the mysteries of sound. We'll start by talking to Alexandra and Bryan about how they got into film. We'll go in alphabetic order like we're in grade school. So we'll start with you, Alexandra. How did you get in film? Did you study it in school, or like how did you land in it? How did you end up in sound?
I ended up in sound because I was not a very skilled guitarist. I was taking guitar lessons and it was attached to a recording studio. And I ended up becoming way more interested in the recording side of things and started working there as a teenager, and then decided I wanted to move to LA and pursue it as a career. I moved to LA when I was 17 and went to audio engineering school, and then moved back to San Diego, realized that I needed to really make my footprint in LA. So I went ahead and moved back, and I made my way into post-production a couple years later, maybe 4 years later, and I have done almost every job in post-production sound. I was a stage technician, and then I was a sound effects editor, a sound designer, a supervising sound editor, effects mixer, and now dialogue mixer mostly.
Wow, it's quite a journey. What school did you go to in LA?
I went to Musicians Institute.
Oh, hello, Kat.
I know, I'm sorry. I
It's
thought I
okay.
locked him out of here. I went to Musicians Institute, and it was a short school, but I had learned a lot in the recording studio that I worked at as a teenager. It was a completely analog studio, and my only goal really of going to MI was to learn Pro Tools because I had heard that this program was going to revolutionize recording, and it definitely was in the process of doing that when I started learning it.
It's interesting. What about you, Bryan? How did you land in sound?
I've worked in sound for a long time. My first job when I was 14 was working at like a theater auditorium, setting up sound and lights for community events and shows and so forth. So I worked the live sound side until I was um, 25 or so. Um, and in so doing, I met a very close friend of mine, Vince Tennant. We worked at the same touring sound company together, setting up jazz shows and festivals. And this was like the late 90s, so raves from like Detroit to, I think our furthest show from where we lived in Ohio was like Washington, D.C. So we were traveling, doing live sound. You learn how to work fast. You learn how to solve problems really fast at a live show, which is nice. Anyway, my friend Vince, came out and had an internship at Fox Blue Sky, and was like, "Wait, so there's this whole other thing. You could be a sound editor." And we were familiar with the tool. We're familiar with various recording softwares and Pro Tools on the music side as well, because we were in bands and recorded each other and other people's bands. We were both the kind of like not, also not quite good enough at guitar to hack on that side of things. So we were the musician adjacent type of people who got roped into mixing live shows and records and stuff. So the tools were not foreign to us. But he came on here and sort of um, pursued that path. And at a certain point, the bottom fell out of what I was doing, playing music and whatever I was doing in Ohio, and he said, "Yeah, what you're gonna want to do is move to LA and do this." So he was right, and Yeah, worked in reality TV for a little while and indie movies, and just kind of kept pushing. And I'm primarily a dialogue centered person. Like getting really punchy dialogue is job one for me. But um, I've also worked as sound designer, sound effects editor, and mostly a sound supervisor now. Yeah, that's what it is.
So did you learn a lot of these roles on the job, I'm guessing?
For sure, yeah. I didn't go to school uh, for um, for sound or for film. My degree is in electrical engineering,
Oh,
which
wow.
doesn't come up a ton. Um, although Musicians Institute sounds, I might go check that out later. No, it's a different, it's a really different path, but yeah, I learned a lot by pretending I could and sort of saying yes and stretching myself out a lot along the way, I think.
And did you find that, what did you feel like you were at a disadvantage compared to somebody who went to school, or you were just so motivated that you self-taught and just kept pushing?
I feel good about having sort of kept the notion of keep pushing in the forefront. Um, I do find that people who went to film school, have sort of a built-in network of people who might be making movies and connections and um, uh, just potential mentors and so forth. It's
I agree
trying
with
to
that.
make your way in this without a mentor is sort of a weird thing. Sort of, to be honest with you, it's been tough at times, and I find you have to push harder sometimes, but that's all right.
Yeah, just to get your work shown in front of people who trust, because in the end it all turns into being about trust. If somebody trusts you with their project because they're actually asking you to handle a really huge piece of their film. um, it's the environment that people sit in to watch it. It's the tone, the quality, everything is sort of embellished with sound.
I found too that like when you make a good connection with a filmmaker that um, I don't know, shares your priorities. I guess when you make a good connection, they tend to rely on you to hear things that they don't even hear. It's not like it's really not not the kind of role where you're just to execute someone else's orders. It's really not that. They expect. I found there's a level of expectation that we are keeping track um, of the whole department, and some things are assumed to be you know organized and accurate um, from the jump, which is an interesting component. I wouldn't have known that, when I got started.
Yeah, I'll say in school for me, I actually didn't learn anything about post production in school. It wasn't even on my mind. But what school did for me was show me that there are, because a lot of our teachers were other professionals in audio engineering, and it showed me that there's hope, that there's a job in what I love doing. I think that that was like the most important thing to get out of that, because at the time when I went to school, it was people were discouraging me from pursuing a career in sound or audio, because it was a time when things were changing and things were becoming digital and more accessible at home. But I knew that I wanted to have a hand in making these creative projects through sound, so I kept forging ahead. And I did do I took a small detour and got a job, an overnight job at a video house doing dailies color correction. And everything was on film at that time, so I went, my shift started at 3 a.m. I picked up my boxes of film, I laced up this giant telecine, and I sunk all the original audio. And that actually bridged the gap for me between audio and film, because I learned a lot of the technical aspects of film and picture and frame rates and aspect ratios. All of those things came together for me there. And then from there, it was just about tuning my ear and learning what I liked creatively and what sound I like and what I wanted to achieve through sound.
And like speaking of sound and, you know, having gone to school and there's so many roles that you can do within the sound department, how do you explain what you do to your family and friends who are not in film? How do you decipher that? I'm sure this comes up a lot.
First, I mean, for me, first I try to gauge how deep their interest actually is. Like, there's definitely like a skim the surface level answer to that question, and yeah, there's you can answer that a couple different ways. How do you do it, Alex?
Well, I'll say half of my family lives in Mexico, and almost every year they assign a new job to me. My uh, they they thought that I was a picture editor for a long time, and now I just got a message yesterday. My dad was complimenting me on how well I composed all of the music, and he gave me quite a big of a bump there. um, but I do still tirelessly try to explain, what the textures of background sounds and sound effects and what the difference between Foley and hard effects. And I do talk to them quite a bit about that stuff. They seem interested, but I think that it's hard for them to really fathom what all of that means when they haven't seen it broken down into pieces. They only see a final product. So but yeah, I think what Bryan said is right. I try to see how interested, I'll do a quick summary of what I do, and then go from there to see if there are more questions. And I'm happy to talk about it. I can talk about it for years.
Yeah.
So say I'm interested in getting into sound and I'm just an assistant. Can you explain the hierarchy to me from assistant to the top?
From from an assistant in the sound department.
Yes.
Um, it's funny. To be totally honest, the union makes it really hard to get that first step up into assistant. Um, so, but basically, from there, there are sound assistants or assistant sound editors who take turnover from the picture department, from an assistant editor, and convert that, convert the whatever it is, picture guides, AAF, and sound rolls into formats that the sound department can use, and keep organized what version numbers all those are, and keep all the last frame of action tables adjusted or updated, to make sure that everyone knows what they're working on and what the most updated thing is. Very important. Thank you, Purnell. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mark Coffey. Thank you, Ryan Meadows. So they keep all that straight for the sound editors and the sound supervisor. The re-recording mixer, like Alex, doesn't always deal with the different versions of picture that come in, especially on the broadcast side of the world.
It's changing now.
It's changing.
With streaming. It's true. By the time that it ends up on the stage, it's been through most major conforms, but we do sometimes end up with some conforms on stage. So, but at the most, in a series, like I'm working on a series right now, I've encountered 4 conforms. So it's not a lot compared to like in a feature editorial situation where you're getting conforms almost every week, right?
So you're saying you've only conformed 4 times over the course of a season
8
of TV?
episodes, yeah.
Over the course of 8 episodes. And were those 4 separate episodes, or were any of them 2 conforms for 1 episode and 1 for 2
different episodes? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you and for anybody who doesn't know, a conform is taking the sound work that has been done to a previous version of picture, and then when picture department makes changes taking that sound work and moving it and adjusting it and conforming it to the new timeline. So if a scene has been removed from our January 1st version, and then we receive a January 2nd version, the scene's been removed, then all the sound that we built for the January 1st version needs to be removed, and the timeline adjusted. Oh boy, needs to be removed and the timeline adjusted so that our sound still stays in sync with picture, right? So that we're conforming the sound work to the new cut. That's what the word conforming.
Thank you for that explanation.
So, as you might imagine, even if the picture department made changes and didn't tell us, it still looks like it's the sound department's fault if the sound is out of sync because we didn't do the conform right. So a big part of our job in features and in prestige streamy type TV too is managing those conforms to make sure that the work stays up to date with the picture cut as the picture cut changes. And in general, the higher the budget, the more they expect to be able to like make changes late in the game, and even up to conforming on stage, like Alex described. Is that clear?
Yeah, that is. And then while we're going back to the hierarchy a little bit, what does the sound editor do? What does the sound designer and sound supervisor do? Like before I started working in post, I always thought that the sound designer did everything. And then I realized that there's so many people who are there working with the sound designer. It's like, how can you explain the delineation among all those roles?
I have an idea for that delineation, but Alex, do you want to speak to it first?
Well, I will point out that the term sound designer has been floating around for quite a while with some controversy.
It's pretty flexible, that term.
It's pretty flexible, yes.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, sometimes it's a person who just delivers like the gray area between sound effects and music, like the sort of textural sounds. Sometimes it's somebody who does all the conceptual sounds, like if there's themes in the film. And then sometimes it's somebody who does all of those things plus the hard effects. And then sometimes it's somebody who is like a department head of the sound effects department and doesn't always do the actual designing themselves, but they describe, they sort of like a sound director in a way.
And that's because it's the coolest sounding title. That's the reason why some people take that title when they haven't done what most folks in our biz refer to as sound design, I think, because it sounds cool. It's a cool title. Like Alex said, there's this thing that's not cups on saucers, that's not car engines zooming by, that's not music. There's this other thing that is intended to shape mood in a non-musical or mostly non-musical way. There's a way of using sound to subtly steer, sometimes not so subtly, to steer the emotions of the audience in a way that's more abstract. Although I guess like plenty of sound designers will work in a very practical realm as well. Paula Fairfield is a sound designer who does a lot of creature work, who does a lot of like things that don't exist in the real world and thus cannot be recorded with a microphone, have to be built out of parts and made to feel very real, very practical. So that's also sound design as well. But I'm going to back up a little bit. So sound editors are basically dialogue editors and effects editors for the most part, Foley editors.
ADR editors.
What's that?
And ADR editors.
And ADR editors, sometimes under the umbrella of dialogue editors and sometimes not. Mm-hmm. ADR stands for, additional dialogue recording, or some people harken back to automated dialogue recording, although I think that you'll find that, automated dialogue replacement. I think you'll find it's quite manual, that process, and not automated at all. Um, um, so those are the sound editors that work under a supervising sound editor or sound supervisor. Um, uh, and Generally, the editorial department is a fairly self-contained thing that tends to hand off the work to the re-recording mixers with fixes. You know, there's dialogue back and forth. Um, does that am I getting anywhere close to answering your
Well,
question
I
about
think
a
I
Kind
hierarchy?
think
of
the
close. Yeah, I was just like, if you can like succinctly explain what the supervisor, the
Yeah,
editor, and the designer do, because
sure.
I sometimes that could be confusing for somebody from the outside.
I'll speak to my experience um, as a sound supervisor. What I do, the 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 two sentence version is that I meet with the um, filmmaker. I assess what their goals are on a project basis and a scene by scene basis, and I translate what their storytelling goals are into actionable things that my sound editors can do, and then do some of them myself. And then when my sound editors are done doing those things, I pull them back into the session and review them to make sure that they're in line with our previously identified storytelling goals sound wise, and tweak them and make sure that they're going to work, make sure they're laid out in a way that makes sense for my particular mixer, and you know, in alignment with her or his track layout preferences and the way that I know that my people like to work. Just make sure this is all going to stay smooth for everybody, and then we do it.
I
I also
can
also cue ADR and
right.
help actors record that ADR we talked about. It's a big part of my role as a sound supervisor.
And I just wanted to say that Bryan is so lovely to work with because he really looks at every single detail. Whenever I've received his edits when they are delivered to me to mix, it's always beautiful.
Thank you. It's important. I think it's an important part of. Um, we were just actually talking about this the other day over coffee. I think it's important to tailor the incoming work on stage to the way that it will be worked on, and make sure that every person has the information that they need to do their job the way that the way that they work best, and are given the resources to operate in their like optimum range. That's a big. I think that's a big thing, especially you know as the calendars get crushed and the
Mm-hmm.
budget shrink. Like getting everyone to stay stoked on the work and put their best work forward and work the way that they like to, and not like you know some editors are bad at conforms and don't like doing them. And if that's the case, man, take a couple of the weeks of this feature, just hire a dedicated conform editor, someone who's really good and
Mm-hmm.
very like organized and eins and do it. You know, like, don't cram people into
And
poorly sized boxes.
aside from all of the like technical layout and all of those things for delivery, the thing that really stands out to me about Bryan's work is the choices, both in both roles, and both as a sound supervisor and a re-recording mixer. We're making like hundreds of thousands of decisions about every line of dialogue and which mic to choose and how to play the music and what kind of fade to what kind of fade would be best on this music. And I feel like whenever I get a session from Bryan, I feel really confident that everything has been meticulously analyzed and that the best choice was made in terms of like which ADR will match or how it should be edited in. It's always gonna fit right in and make my job of making it sound in the environment and match the production much easier because I don't have to think about all of these other aspects. Those have already been thought of for me.
That makes me feel really good. Thank you. I'm glad that
That's
comes
really
across.
nice. So, as we know, filmmaking is a collaborative sport. How do you collaborate with the editor, the director, and the composer? And at what stages do you start engaging with those three?
Why don't you take this one, Alex?
Well, for me, I work with the composer quite through the music editor. So music editing is actually, we didn't mention it earlier because music department is its own department, but on the stage, along with everything that like Bryan or a different sound supervisor would bring to the stage, um, I would also get a delivery of the music, which comes through the music editor. And a lot of times there are notes from the composer, and there are cats in the room. um,
That's okay.
a lot of times there are composers who have specific ideas and things that they want to relate to the stage as well to make sure that they're preserved in the mix, because everybody who's put time in up to this point has like a great amount of like energy and love and like care that they've put into these tracks. Um, so sometimes I liaise with them, um, but for somebody like Bryan, he as a sound supervisor, you start fairly early. Sometimes when I've sound supervised, I'll get a script before they even shoot. Some of the directors who I've worked with, um, for many years, they know that I would love to read a script ahead of them shooting in case there's anything that they could pick up or something that they might not think about in terms of like a musical moment or anything that they might want to start thinking about in production, so that we can have an easier and a better time with more control in post production.
Sometimes, and this, it's certainly not this way all the time, but my repeat customers, my clients that bring work back to me multiple times. Um, yeah, tend to send me a script before the script's even done, like before they shoot, before they even finish the script that they're going to shoot, and say like, so what do you see in here that I don't see yet? And I love that. I mean, the level of trust that shows is just wonderful, and it feels very very collaborative to say, okay, working on this comedy, I'll take the script and put it in my little whatever, my little reader thing, and mark it up on PDF and say like, oh, this is great. Let's make sure we use a metal kitty scoop here because that's going to sound funnier than a plastic one for this moment. Let's make sure that we do this for sound reasons. Tell your props department to this should be this way because I can guarantee we can get a funny sound out of this version. It'll be funnier than if they happen to choose this other version, and I'll make a whole markup thing. Or, I guess I probably shouldn't talk specifics about
Certain things.
things that are on my mind right now, but yeah, like there's a lot of collaboration
What about stuff in the past that we've seen maybe?
let's see. Um, I'm sure I could come up with some stuff, but it would take me a little while. But it's just mostly about like, look, the prop. I'm sure that the property master and the production set designer would take their pass through and say like, oh, I've got a perfect mid-century ottoman for this. As this script describes the action of this scene, we should pursue it this way. Or I'm sure that if there's a solid relationship between the director and the heads of those departments, that they, might get a chance to have their input early. And my clients tend to send me stuff pretty early on too. Once we have built that trust, and they do trust me to think of things that they wouldn't have thought of. I love that. That's my favorite thing. It's helping
Let's
steer like.
hear if you have trust with your directors and stuff. What about like working with editors? We talked about the turnovers that comes mostly through the assistant editors, but how do you work with the editors? Or do you even interface with them at all?
Oh,
For
we
sure.
do a lot, yeah.
Yeah, quite a lot. On on both actually, on broadcast projects and features, you get to you get to develop a shorthand about what our, like I said, our storytelling goals are. And one of the ways that you can get towards the common understanding of what sound's going to do for this scene or for that scene is to different ideas, same direction, is to try and record, design, build, whatever, some sounds and get them into the cut early. So, not when the budget allows, budget doesn't allow, calendar allows, calendar doesn't allow. Who knows? But when possible, if you try and get your sounds into a director's cut, into a rough cut, then you have it just gives you more time to talk about what's working about them, and maybe you strike gold for the design, and you're like, and the first or second time they hear an iteration in the timeline, like, oh, this is great. They get used to it. That's what they're used to, it sounding that way, and they carry it forward for another month or two, and you're good. You spread it out a little bit in the mix, you're good. If not, you have more time to steer what is or is not working about it, and so when you do get the locked cut, you're steps closer to what is working. It does happen sometimes that that you supply a good sound and they get sick of it only because they've heard it too many times, but that's more rare.
And while we're on that, Alex, you can jump in. Falling in love with temp. How do you navigate the politics of that from either the director's perspective or the editor's perspective, right? They're working in editorial and the editor has placed this temp sound, and now it's like, you've kind of fallen into the temp love space. How do you navigate the politics of that when like your inclination is telling you that it could be better?
We deal with this quite a lot because a lot of people have really settled into their temps. They've been living with them for months sometimes, and when they come to the stage, it does to them. It rubs them as being wrong if it's too different. But what I try to do is I actually do carry the temp on the stage, and I always refer to it in heavily designed moments or heavily musical moments. To see what I look at the temp as like an audible direction. I see that they've talked about it. The director and the editor have come up with this version, which was good enough for them to get out in a cut. So they like this direction, and how can we make it better? How can we improve it? How can we make it ours? And show them something that's both new and exciting, but also has the same like fabric or thread that they had in their idea bank. So I do sort of like I try to make sure that everything is spread and everything is sort of has a cherry on top of what they were expecting on the stage.
Yeah, it can be a tough thing. The politics, we have different methods for managing it. The politics can be a tough thing because, I mean, exactly like Alex said, as a rule, the picture editor and the director or the showrunner or whoever have been sitting with a version of a mocked up sound mix. Rough mix, Avid mix, for 3 times longer than we have with it, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something like, I'll be real with you, on comedies, I tend to change as little as possible in terms of the sound effects that are in spotting. When I'm spotting a comedy, I try to get a read from them on exactly what they like and exactly what they don't, what has gotten a laugh, because there's something about a sound effect or a timing of a moment or even a line of really, really poorly recorded dialogue sometimes that if it gets a laugh, what else is there? What, you're going to spend time getting that really nice clean recording and then not get a laugh out of it? Like, nothing else matters. Once this moment gets a laugh, hands off. And we might need to build up the backgrounds around it. We might need to set up the moment and drop out the ambiances leading up to it to make sure that the laugh, whatever sound effect the picture editor had in there that got a laugh, if it's the right sound, and and we'll provide another option ready to go in case they want to experiment on stage. But honestly, for comedies, like once it's working, it's just working. That's just it. So it's much more about like supporting all the moments around those moments. On non-comedy type stuff, then it's I feel a little bit more free to push a presentation that I think is working better, and sometimes I'll just, if I'm being honest, I'll just say like, hey, I need you to trust me. Just for the next 4 times we watch this reel, I need you to watch it with this because you're, the version that you have in here of this reverse ghost breath from Sound Ideas 1000 or whatever.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Like, I need you to trust me that this isn't gonna read to other people as well as the custom sounds we've built around it. So, for the rest of the day, we're gonna see if we can get ourselves to be comfortable with this, and we'll talk about it. But again, I mean, that it still just comes back to trust.
And I was gonna piggyback on what you said about having another version ready to go, because that's one thing is when I see that something can be wildly improved and that we have we have like the awesome sound design, we have like a way or a different way to mix the music, we have I will always have it ready to go. I'll present the version that I think might be really impactful to our director or executive producer, and then I'll also be really ready to have a second version to present just after that's more in line with what they had in mind, so that they could sort of hear the difference in real time, because a lot of times it just takes, they'll say, well, can I hear what we had or something close to what we had, and I'll show it to them, and then they can sometimes realize that they were just used to the thing that they were used to, and that once they hear this newer version just right against it, A/B it, that they are more open to exploring it.
In practical terms, I inside Pro Tools, the software I use, I take all the picture editor's sound effects and I color them the brightest orange that Pro Tools has to offer from the jump. So no matter what track they end up on, I color the clips. So no matter where they go, I never color anything else that color. So I'm conveying to the mixer all the time, without words, like, hey, this is their sound. If they want to hear what they did, these are the ones that they were used to from before, either as a reference or as a, hey, can you boost the one I put in there, so that it's really easy. Separate from the dialogue color code, which is a whole thing, very important thing.
I love your dialogue color code. Somebody actually did the opposite of what you do, with the boom and the boom being blue and the lav being green. Someone
flipped that?
Yes, and it's really confusing me because I'm so used to your edit.
Oh man, we got to sit down and talk about that. We got to develop some standards industry wide. We got to get this sorted out.
Yeah, each person just kind of comes up with their own color coding system, right?
Usually, yeah.
Track layouts and color codes, and yeah, I tend to send an image out at the beginning of a show and say like, hey, here's what we're doing. Be real clear.
But it varies from show to show, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because there'll be some stuff that isn't relevant.
Code. Yeah.
Which is why Alex is confused now. So can you share a fun fact of how, hopefully you can share something that's already out that you can talk about, like a fun fact where you used sound to my scarf is just
it's beautiful.
It's good.
Scarf.
Thank you. It was a bit chilly today. Where you've used sound to enhance the storytelling in an unexpected way.
Unexpected way.
Or expected, but like a fun fact is like in some of the shows of.
I mean, we try to do that every day, don't we?
Yeah. Yes, I know it's hard
So,
to.
like, if you had to pick one where it's just like, wow, like this just,
If,
I'm sure
um,
there's many, but like if you had to pick one or two.
I can talk about there in the film that I recently mixed sound effects actually on Everything Everywhere All at Once. There's a moment um, where Michelle Yeoh's character Evelyn is realizing that the way that she looked at life was uh, not the way that she's learning to look at life, and she's falling back in love with her husband. And at that moment, there's big score there too, but there was some sound design that was laid under the score, and it was visually so beautiful. It had like this red hue behind them. They were in the laundromat, and she was finally looking at her husband with love, and there was this big glowing uh, like red hue. And I, my first inclination was to sort of play the sound design heavy, because it was very vibrational and it felt really nice, like to see that image and to feel it in your body. But then what ended up happening was that um, we ended up taking it down quite a bit, and now it's more subliminal, and I think that that made it more powerful, because I think it's allowing space for people to really feel that on their own, like in their own life, rather than it happening like outside of them. So I think that that was unexpected, because it actually meant more to have less in that moment, and it's still really powerful.
had you heard what was your process like there? Had you heard the final score when you envisioned the sound design playing up, or how did that go? What timing was?
Yeah, I was playing against, because I did the final mix, so we had a score in with us
So
on the
from your
mix
first pass, you had
from
final
my
score. You weren't waiting on
first.
it along the way.
Yeah, but
Cool.
there was room still for the lower end stuff to play. There was definitely like sonic room. It was more of a taste decision. It wasn't getting in the way of music in any way, like tonally, but and that's why I sort of filled up that space. But then when it was actually the Daniels that wanted that to come down, and for it to feel like a little bit more abstract, I was really excited about how that ended up playing.
What
Would
does
you?
sonic room mean? Sorry, Bryan.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sonic room is a term I might have made up, but
Okay.
but like just like a canvas, how there's
Okay.
like an empty can just filling all of the space in the canvas.
Would you speak for a minute um, about um, about stepping into the role of mixing sound effects on that? Okay, I think of you as a very musical mixer. I think that one of the things that you do best is weaving powerful emotional music against a great dialogue mix. um, and that's something
Thank you.
I've always admired about your work. In that chair, would you speak for a minute about shifting gears and then like not being in charge of the shape of the music and instead um, feathering your sound effects against it?
Yeah, it was. It's interesting because it has been a while since I mixed effects. I mean, throughout my career, I've really mixed both dialogue and effects, because a lot, when I was starting out, especially, most every project I got was both sides of the mix. It only had a budget for a one person mix, so I only had to, agree with myself in those moments. But as far as I think that having all of these years behind me now as a dialogue and music mixer helped me come in and mix effects, in a way where um, I kind of would know, what things would bump for me if I were mixing music. So I wouldn't like. That's how I mentioned there was sonic space for it, meaning like if the sound design was really tonal or even rhythmic, then it would get in the way of the music, and so I made sure not to play anything that was interfering with that. So I think that it was advantageous actually to mix effects now that way, and it was interesting because a lot of times, well, especially this final mix was a short period of time, um, and you kind of anticipate your partner mix, like what they'll end up doing with what they're playing. And it was interesting because the anticipation process was interesting because I know what I would do in that moment, but I was sometimes surprised and a lot of times pleasantly surprised with what they did with the music. So it was just a different experience, but it was really nice, and it was a really collaborative team, and everybody was, there was no ego in that room. We were just like, giving each other notes, and really everybody was just working on the
I love that
film.
so much.
Yeah.
I love that. I love when, like, yeah, it's. I love it when a mix stage doesn't have like a walk in the door, assess the hierarchy kind of
Yeah.
thing. I love when the effects mixer and the dialogue mixer are comfortable enough with each other and with the sound super that like the effects mixer can give a dialogue note, like say like, I'm trying to clear for it, but I'm still having trouble with that line, or whatever it is, whatever it is. Um, when the whole room can just like center the work and not their own egos,
Yeah.
it's really pretty special.
It is special, and I wish it wasn't so rare, but I feel like that might be changing. I think that a lot of people are seeing, how much further you can get creatively when that's not present.
Yeah, I think that people are putting up with like alpha male horse shit on stage a lot less now than they used to.
Yeah.
There was a time when when the consoles cost $250,000 or
Mm.
whatever, and there were you know a very small number of people who could even operate them in town. You just had to put up with one of those 12 people
Yes.
or whatever. And now the technology has changed enough that like if you have good taste and actually use your ears, um, you can do the work on much less expensive gear. So there are more people who have developed those skills, and so like you don't, I don't know, you have more options, and like having a curious and collaborative attitude goes a lot further now.
Yeah, it's a collaborative team sport, I mean,
Yeah,
film is a collaborative sport, is what I meant to
Yes.
say.
for sure.
Have you thought about your fun fact, Brian, or
Yeah, I mean, I just did a movie um, recently that
what is
uh,
it called? Can you talk about
yeah,
it?
yeah, sure. It's called A Lot of Nothing. It was in South
Okay.
by Southwest, and it's a
Okay.
movie.
Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. It was super fun. I went to Austin. It ruled. I just drank coffee and rode bikes and watched movies.
Dream world.
um, and yeah, there's a moment there that was like in cut, was pretty music up, pretty music heavy, with great score. Um, and our director Mo wanted more. He wanted for sound to push it forward in another dimension as well. And we came up with this sort of um, okay. There's a moment where our female lead sees the antagonist, and just it plays very subjective, and we go way in her head down into slow mo, and she's really fixates on the neighbor antagonist. And like I said, the score is gorgeous. Um, but we went and did this fractal thing where she drops an apple, so I have the sound of the apple dropping. But I timed the sound of the apple dropping to I took like a bouncing ping pong ball, golf ball, or something, just to get that like golden ratio to get that timing exactly right. And then I took sound of an apple and timed it out to that, right? Great. And then I took those and bounced it out, made it way longer so I could get the sound. My hands are too. Okay, great. So I could get the sound of that rhythm. Made it way longer. So then I made each of those, made it like a minute long. So the space between each of those drops was a few seconds. And then I took different variations of that drop and put it on each of the longer drops, if that makes sense. Yeah? So then the individual dropping shapes are now getting closer to each other, right? In the same mathematical relationship that the initial ping pong ball drop did, the same physics. Um, and uh, and it created
Say
this.
you don't use the engineering.
I was thinking the same thing.
um,
That degree is coming in handy.
so maybe right, maybe right. Um, and So then it wasn't just the apple drop too. I made some additional impacts and textures like on the modular synth or whatever, and and built this thing. So it always felt like it was flexing and getting faster, and the tension was rising, and I subtly changed the pitch along with it to build this moment where she chooses confrontation. And I want it to sound like just the not the sound of blood rushing in your head, but the feeling of like your head about to burst because of the tension in there. That's what I wanted out of it. And the director was so good and so like, go get it. His attitude was like, try it, bring it back to me, and bring it back to him. We push it further in whichever way he wants to, and then there's a moment in there where like when she makes the decision, he wanted the sound of like emerging from that decision to sound like emerging from the concept was water. I'm not sure it totally reads that watery in there, but there is a certain like a certain swelling and rush of it as she's like in her head making this decision, and I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud of it. And I feel this was the rare movie where I actually mixed it as well, which I don't do a lot, but um, I I made I made a lot of space for the score because I loved it. I thought it was beautiful, but I pushed the design into fitting around that sonic space that Alex was talking about in ways they could coexist, and just serve different functions. Yeah, I think that's my thing. That's kind of a long
Pretty
explanation.
cool. Yeah, these are things I would never thought of when I'm watching a movie. I'm just like, oh, cool. But
There's
Yeah.
so many thoughts that go into just one individual sound. Today I was talking about everything everywhere all at once with our sound designer, who Andrew Twite. He did an amazing, like he cut so many options and so many beautiful textural tracks. But he was describing how he made the hot dog fingers, and he's like, we put celery, we put balloons, and I mean there was like
wow.
17 sounds in there, and it's the same type of thing. You kind of climb in when you're sound designing. You really like climb into a rabbit hole. At first you're like, oh fuck, I don't know how I'm gonna do this thing, and then all of a sudden you go down a path, and then you're adding textures and sounds, and then you're thinking of just the wildest things that could help this sound like what you're trying to make.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah, I imagine that film was an indie. Bryan, you and I have worked on a short together. Thank you again for working on Team Maryland. Um, when you're doing the final mix, filmmakers want 7:1, 5:1, and then there's also the stereo. How do you what do you recommend for indie filmmakers who are on a budget? But also considering the fact that a lot of the films when they're submitted to festivals, they, especially short films, they're playing in a block with films that were made in different environments than theirs. What do you recommend in that? Do you push them towards stereo or keeping the 5:1? I'm curious to hear what you have to say on that.
I think it's important to mix in the widest format that you can first, because you
Mhm.
can derive, a stereo from your 5.1, and it's much better to mix in a larger format because you have all the options. You can have it. You can mix it really the way that it will play in a theater. And then you should go back and listen to it on the smalls and see how that's translating to make sure that you're also happy with how it will be in smaller format. But it's a lot easier to go, from larger to smaller format than it is from smaller to larger. Um, I think that it takes just as much work for us editorially and just as much time in a mix to produce um, either.
Yeah, there was a time when that wasn't true. That last part. There
Yeah.
was a time when it was cheaper to do stereo.
Hmm.
And I when I worked at a reality house, we would vary the budgets. You know, okay. Here's the reason. Because when you're coming out stereo, then your dialogue is coming out both left and right, and also your like Tweety birds and your backgrounds are coming out left and right, but separately. So you can stripe in just stereo backgrounds, and it's coming out the same place. Dialogue is coming out. So whatever seams exist and whatever noise shifts that exist in the dialogue, that your dialogue editor smooths out a little bit, but not all the way, you can hide them with stereo sounds. So all you really need to do is concern yourself with those two speakers. But in 5.1, your dialogue is coming out the center channel by itself, and so the music isn't going to help you at all. And all of your backgrounds have to be covered both in stereo and in center, so the center channel stays glued and the dialogue has something to anchor to in the center channel. Um, these days, like, so we used to like whatever, like charge more for 5.1.
Well, I mean, for Atmos, obviously, it's a totally different process
Different thing.
on the deliverables
Yeah.
side and stuff, and also in the crash down side of things. So, I mean, aside, but the one thing I will mention is obviously if you mix in stereo, you don't need to be on a mix stage. That's one thing you can have, you can produce some kind of a mix with an editorial team. But like, if you start going into 5.1, you're gonna need to take it into a space that can handle 5.1. But I absolutely think that that's worth it because um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's you want to know, like Bryan was saying, that relationship. You have, if you have music in 5.1 and you can really control where your dialogue is and the imaging around it, much more than you can in a stereo situation. And then you can't really upmix your stereo because then those balances will be completely out of whack.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. And
Big jump in terms of initial financial investment into being able to do Atmos at all. Huge jump
Yeah, right.
monetarily,
That's, yeah.
and so they're, any studio is going to huge jump. So any studio is going to have to charge a lot more for Atmos projects just because they built the room that can handle it.
Yeah,
In terms of project studios, home studios, I don't I don't mix in Atmos at home. I mix in 5.1 at home. Um, so like even if someone only needs a stereo, like I still build it in my 5.1 template and then just monitor the stereo crash down that I have built into it already. It's no different really. I would rather build it out so that the dialogue stem is consistent and clean anyway.
hmm
And like in case they change their minds later, like, oh, it turns out we got into this weird festival and they won 5.1, then I don't have to completely unravel the work because I'm
hmm
not gonna just like automate upmix a stereo thing into a 5.1. I'm not
yeah,
willing to do
it
that.
doesn't work that way.
that makes
Um,
sense. That makes sense.
but so yeah, between stereo and 5.1, for any real semi-real mixing environment, not a huge jump. Up to Atmos,
Yeah, that's a
order of
significant jump.
magnitude,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of Atmos, are there any like current sound trends? Inquiring minds want to know, like, these days, like the big films like the Tenets, like the effects and the music seem to be louder than the dialogue. Is this like a new trend or what is happening? And I also notice like sometimes when I'm at home and I'm watching a movie, it sounds different than when I watched it in a theater. And I get it, like some of that is like the mixed down, but like, can you talk about that, please?
Um,
Maybe.
well, I'll start only
Yeah.
by saying I do
Bryan.
consider it part of my responsibility as a mixer to make sure that what's called the margin is protected. So that even if I'm directed to make an incoming cue huge, that I still protect if there's dialogue there, that I still make the music huge just under the dialogue if we're meant to understand and have this dialogue be discernible, then I have to know what that relationship is and where that limit is. And also I have to know how that will translate into a stereo from what we're hearing in the 5-1. That's part of our memory at this point, how we think that might translate. So we'll make suggestions, and sometimes the director, if we make the suggestion like, well, if I push it louder, we might lose some clarity on these couple of words, and if the director is still cool with it, then that's what we'll do. If they'd rather feel that hit in the music rather than hear these first couple of words of dialogue. So it's really about our responsibility, sharing where the margin is and protecting it when it's meant to be protected, and to know how it's going to play in multiple formats.
As far as like the version that you hear at home sounding different than what you hear in the theater, I'd be super interested to know the specifics of that, because the two things going on there are, one, the playback environment in a 7.1 theater versus if your home system is stereo,
It's stereo.
then
Yeah.
you might be talking about, it is stereo. Yeah, then you might be talking about literally just the translation between that gear and this gear. But it's also possible, there does exist the near field mix, which is intended to get around this problem. If producers expect for a film to have a theatrical run and then also land, the long tail of views is probably going to be on a streamer somewhere, or
Mm-hmm.
in smaller format somewhere. Um, and if the producer values the viewing experience after the theatrical, then they should budget for a near field mix, which is where we take the larger format mix, and we monitor in a smaller environment with smaller speakers closer to us, and make sure that the big stuff still feels big, and we limit the dynamic range, though.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the actual peaks of the audio might not be what you can reproduce in a theater, but you cannot reproduce in your home, they still feel big, but our dialogue is still front and center. And hopefully, if we have done our job well in this regard, and if the producer has budgeted for the near field mix, hopefully then watching at home, you're not like reaching for the remote all the time and like turning the volume down in the car chase and turning it up whenever they talk in the
That's
moments in
me
between
all
the
the
car chase.
time.
Yeah. The near field mix is intended to try and replicate in some way the energy and the sound intention of the film for smaller playback environments. That's what it's intended to do. Now, not every movie operates in a budget range where they can make that.
And television doesn't. I think that's what I was thinking of too. Is a lot of times we're mixing in 5.1 or Atmos for TV, and there are moments where I'll check the 2-track to see how it's translating here and there, but we don't have time to we usually don't have time to listen in
A
multiple
full
formats.
pass. Yeah. The last series that Alex and I did together had a showrunner who was really conscious of this thing and wanted to listen to the smalls quite a lot for key scenes, and that was good. Also, I will say, I come from a dialogue background. I value dialogue a lot. Really clean, punchy dialogue track is very, very important to me. And I will say that on that show, which had an older audience, our audience skewed older,
True.
and dialogue,
Can you
people's
name the
hearing.
show?
Sure, yeah, we worked on this show called Bull,
Okay.
whose audience skews a little older,
Okay.
and I like literally would have people would stop me when they found out, like like a neighbor's dad or something. This happened more than once. They would stop me and say, "Oh, You work on that show. You work on. I love that show. I can understand every word they say in that show,
That's
and
amazing.
Wow. That's
that was
amazing.
super important to me. I mean, it has its exciting moments and action sequences here and there, but a lot of talking, and like dialogue was king. It felt like we were serving a segment of the market that like felt overlooked. They're like, I don't know these people are saying on TV anymore.
Uh,
Um, so
My mom also had the same review.
oh,
Not being able
wow.
to hear it, but she's my mom, so you know.
That's amazing. I'm sure that was wonderful to hear, all that
oh,
time you
absolutely,
spent working on the dialogue. That's really
yeah,
good.
yeah.
It warms my heart. Um, we're here now. Like, if you could look into the future and design it out however you want, where would you like post sound to go? The future of post sound to go?
I'm still waiting on my Minority Report screens where I can just like interact with Pro Tools like this and not have to use a mouse. But that's not what you're asking, I think. Um,
That
I
works
would like
too.
to see I would like to see more scripts. Like how I was saying, how some of the people I've worked with for years, they will think to send me a script. And I kind of wish that in the future that more directors and producers see the value in attaching a sound team early on so that we can start thinking about things together, because there's a lot of fix it and post, but there's a lot of things that could be, it doesn't have to be a fix. Like I worked on a film, um, who I read the script, and the script had this very very intricate dialogue scene, and it was like kind of the crux of this relationship, and they were like they were like coyly whispering on the phone to each other, and it was to be set on a very busy street. And
Mm,
so I raised a flag and said, if this is going to play the way that I think that we'll want it to play, I would suggest maybe even off the street, like in a alleyway, or just like off the main street, because we're gonna want this to, we're gonna want to zoom into their faces and just be locked into this dialogue rather than having to fight street noise. So that was like something that they changed, or like they hadn't booked locations yet, so they were able to keep that in mind if that's what they wanted, so that they weren't disappointed when they get to the mix stage and want that to happen. And
yeah,
we can do our best at cleaning it up and to noise reduce, but noise reducing also loses some energy some at times. It depends on how bad the noise is, but like they were able to preserve the feeling that they wanted from that scene
yeah.
by shooting it in a way.
and do you
In,
ever communicate with production sound?
That's another thing I'd like to have more common in the future. I try to reach out, especially if it's a show that I'm going to work on for multiple seasons, or if we're going into our second season and there's some things that we could um, hold hands about. I feel like there's like a big stigma from the past about if the re-recording mixer calls the production sound mixer, then there's a problem. And it feels that the production mixer, it used to be anyway, would feel a little defensive right off the bat, which is so unfortunate because really we can help each other out.
Yeah.
my clients that really trust me have like involved me in hiring decisions, with regard to production sound mixers, and and I've had conversations like before seasons or even mid-season, and been involved in pre-records for for musical number comes or something. And again, I just value the trust quite a lot. I don't think that has to be adversarial. I have had the experience where like I asked to have a conversation with the location sound person, and their first attitude was like, "Okay, here we go. I'm gonna take my lumps or whatever." But I don't think it needs to be that. I mean, I think that it's important for us to communicate what we're going to do with the tracks. I mean, there are, even today, even with all the information that's out there and the accessibility of the information about what we do, there are still people who work as production sound mixers who think that their mix track is what ends up in the TV show or the movie. That is not the case. You know, we go every post sound person who cares goes back to the ISOs and builds from the cleanest mics possible to build the cleanest mix possible. We do not use the production tracks, which gets used by picture editors in order to build the pictures out of the story before post sound gets involved. And that so like there's a communication problem there where there are still people who think that that's how it goes, and it's simply not.
I just had that conversation with somebody, and he actually laughed because he said, "Oh my gosh, my colleagues, they all think like my mix is better than yours," and we all
Based on hearing it on air or based on the finished
yeah,
product, yeah.
yeah, and he said, "I had no idea. I guess I'll record my lavs a little hotter." I was like,
Please.
"Yes, please, yeah."
Wow. Yeah, it's quite unfortunate. Hopefully, like, there'll be more communication with post and production sound. Just to,
One team,
like Bryan says.
Yes,
different
let's be
directions.
friends.
Going back to what we talked about earlier in the conversation, like, let's touch on mentorship a little bit and the importance of having mentorship or mentoring those who are coming up after us.
Broad topic.
It is broad. Yeah.
It's a tough thing. I derive a lot of satisfaction from developing people, from assessing people's strengths and stretching them out to, figuring out where they are in order to most effectively push them in the direction that they want to. Oh. After a certain point, the lights in my office start.
Oh, is it on the
or
timer?
Yeah, it's on a
Move
timer
around
/ motion
the-
detector, so I feel like I'll be right back.
There we go. He's back.
I take it very seriously, like developing sound editors and getting them familiar with priorities and used to the conventions and expectations in our business, which are cloudy for some people. That said, I usually train them up on short films or non-union films for a while and kind of see where they're at and see if they really want to do it, because there's a lot of work. I mean,
You have to love it.
it is not. If I get a sense that a person would rather be working on music and is only looking for a way to apply some Pro Tools skills or some general sound knowledge until like a composer gig comes along, I just stop wasting our time right away. You gotta really, really want this. It's when my first job in LA was like regularly doing 15, 16-hour shifts and only billing for 8 or 9, catching, working all night and catching the first or second subway in the morning, just to get it right, just to like, the expectations are this, but I have this much time. How can I possibly do that? And just trying to design a way that was even possible at all. And I'm grateful for that experience now, because I cut fast as hell, and so I get to make more decisions and make more things good in a better storytelling environment now, and that's rad. But yeah, assessing whether people are like really stoked and really serious about it is job one, and then meeting them where they are and pushing them where they want to go, and providing the right projects right in front of them. It just stretches them out enough that they're a little bit uncomfortable, not too uncomfortable.
What about you, Alex?
I think it's hugely important. I had a very valuable mentor when I first started cutting effects, who, was really honest and to the point. My first edit was, I came from music, so I put very long crossfades on stuff, and I remember he really just ripped my edit up. Like, it was, he said, "Why did you choose this? What kind of logic is here? And what are you, and I was so grateful to him. That's another thing, is that I was just so grateful for his honesty. And that session sitting with him where he ripped my session up was, I learned like 5 years worth of knowledge in that session because he was so open with me. So I try to. The other thing I will say about mixing is that a lot of times when I was a tech coming up in the mix world, mixers were very secretive about their sessions and about their secret sauce, and the plugins that they used, and their settings, and people did not want to share. And I think that now, I think that that's changing, and I am really happy about that. But I always make a point to, if somebody who's interested is in the room, I'm I'm going to speak out loud about what I'm doing so that, they can follow along if they're interested, and think of, how they might mix it as well. I try to find people who are also hungry to and passionate about what we do. I think that one misconception is that our job is largely technical, and while we do have to use, you know, audio gear, we have to use Pro Tools, we have to have these skills, and we have to be fast at using them. We have to know all of the quick keys. We have to be able to navigate and get around really, really quickly. That part is true. But the most important part of our job is our decision making, and I think that, so I try to find people who are really interested in sound itself, not so much interested in engineering. Engineering is the secondary part, but who have like, who will mention films to me that they saw and they were curious about, or certain sounds, like, I wonder how they did this, or if they have like a passion for the actual making of the sound, and
Or even
how
like, man, I heard the weirdest bird yesterday.
yes, exactly. Yes, if you're noticing sound in your daily life, like, that's how I know that this person is really interested and like really gonna excel.
One of the things that I try to impress upon folks that are getting started is like, um, well, two things. One, if you decide that you want to get into sound and you look for knowledge in the most accessible version of that, of the information you've got, which is the phone in your pocket. If you listen to the people on the internet, you're going to absorb a lot of information who love to type and repeat things that they have heard on the internet and who don't use their fucking ears. And that's bad. And the other thing I try to impress upon them a year or two in is like, if I'm hiring you, I'm not hiring you to press the button to send this to RX and do a bunch of stuff that you think you should do to press the right buttons and put it back into Pro Tools. I'm not hiring you to open up SoundMiner that you bought and search on door close and put in the first door close that comes up from the library that you bought and put it in the timeline. I'm only hiring you to press play after you've done all the above and listen to the thing and say, this is how I want this scene to sound. If you're not listening to the artifacts that RX brings up, if you're not listening to the quality of the recording that and the quality of the performance of the door close that you've chosen and whether or not it matches picture, if you're not really listening critically to the work that you're handing in, you are absolutely not doing the job. It's only about what you're hearing back and the way it relates to the story, the emotional context of our characters, and what we expect for our audience to either understand or feel. That's it. So, like, I'm not hiring you for 16 tracks for a given punch. I'm only hiring for listening and assessing whether it meets our storytelling goals.
Alex, you shared some of the mistakes you made and you learned from that. Bryan, what are some of the mistakes that you made as you were coming up that were great lessons that you've carried with you to this day?
The mistakes? Man, how much time you got? I was working at a reality house overnights and cutting for a couple tough mixers and a couple really nice ones. And one of the nice ones, Tim Brown, R.I.P., good guy, really good guy. gave me a call after he got his session set up, whatever it was, 9:20 in the morning one day. He was like, "Hey, I got production audio like on our Curse Beeps tracks. What is what?" And I was just tired and sloppy and just trying to be fast before I had it good. This is in the first year I was in the job, and got sloppy. And since I was like, well, at that point, to him and to myself, I said, well, cross that mistake off the list. Moving so fast that I'm not even, taking care to pay attention to my track layout and where I'm actually dragging the clips. Absolutely cross that off the list. You're not gonna, from me, you're not going to run across that again. I mean, if that makes every edit from this point out take an extra X amount of minutes or hours, then so be it. But not an option. If the goal is a sound editor is to have the mixer keep her or his hands on the faders and not have to reach for the mouse to make an editing. No, discussions, whatever. But in general, if the goal is for them to keep their hands on the faders and keep moving and stay engaged with the picture and the levels and not have to think about the elements that are going into it, then like I can't fail that way again. That's it. And my first 2 years of like working overnights were about like just crossing all those mistakes off of the list one at a time until I was, familiar enough with how the process was going to go after I handed it off to make sure that even if I handled something a little bit differently than maybe they would have wanted it to, it still made sense and I wasn't making fundamental errors that were going to slow them down in a particular way. But yeah, the biggest lesson there for me, and the thing that I try to carry forward and tell the people that I train, is it has got to be good before it can be fast. Mm-hmm. And like this is coming from a person who values the speed quite a lot, because I think that if you can make a lot of decisions faster, then you get to make more creative decisions in the day, and that's a good thing.
That's a good one.
The speed's very important, but it absolutely must be good before you can work on shaving keystrokes and whatever to get it fast. Mm-hmm.
Be good before you get fast.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a good one. Well, we're nearing the end. What advice do you have for eager young viewers who want to get into post sound?
I would say to listen. I would say to listen to as many sound mixes as you can and just define, refine what you think is good and think about how you would approach a scene. Because I think that it all ends up being taste. We all have individual style and taste that we bring to the table. And I think that ends up being the most important or the most valuable asset.
Yeah, I say in terms of being an educated viewer / listener, which is a good place to start from if you want to work in the business, put your phone down and think of when you're listening to the work, not even necessarily like shows or movies that you think of as being really good sounding, but just the ones that you like a lot, the ones that move you, the characters that you connect with. If you really listen and engage the part of your brain that analyzes the decisions that craftspersons have made while they're making this show, what elements do you hear that feel really intentional? Okay, cool, yeah. The gun in the drawer that you see in Act 1 is foreshadowing. Cool, great. I'm glad you were awake that day in class. But what are you hearing that might be telegraphing something that's going to happen later? What do you understand about this character's neighborhood based on something you weren't told with dialogue or that you weren't shown with visuals, but instead something that you hear in the backgrounds? What do you understand about their little corner of the world that's different than this other character's little corner of the world? And why do you suppose the filmmakers, sound supervisors, and mixers want you to understand or feel that about that character in his or her environment? And really actively engage with the soundtrack that way. Push yourself into the work and think, well, why did they make that choice here, and how is that different than and how else they could have handled it? Is this something factual or is it something more emotional or whatever? That's an important thing. And the other thing is just to get in there and do it. Just like take student films, go down to LMU or whatever, school nearby has a film program, and just put up a flyer like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll do it for free, and just start mixing movies, just start mixing shorts, just start like pulling together whatever gear you have, Reaper or anything. And
you learn a lot through that process of just getting notes and addressing notes and going through the motions of it.
Yeah. Not waiting around for when you can afford the gear that you think is the gear you need, or not waiting around for a studio to hire you. Just like do it. Just make a sound, like record a sound on your phone and put that sound in a short film. Does that work or does that not work? Use your ears. Not like nobody's paying you just to point a microphone at a thing and hit record and then drag the file. Nobody's paying you for that. That part's great and actually kind of essential a lot of times, but they're only paying you for listening to it back and saying, yes, that's in line with our creative vision. Your ears, only the listening.
That's great.
Actually, when you're cutting short films, no one's paying you at all. But
True.
I paid you a little bit.
And I'm grateful for it.
I paid him in peanuts.
I meant like student short films, but yes, you're right.
I'm joking. So last couple questions. Final words. What you're working on next, if you can say what it is, and favorite film of all time sound-wise.
Oh gosh.
Ooh, that's a huge.
There's so much pressure.
Wow.
What I'm working on next, in terms of next to air, Julia is on HBO Max right now. I think.
I can't wait to see that.
I think episode 5 is going to drop tomorrow. Well, I don't know when you're going to air this, but that's going on. We're very proud of it. It was really, really fun to go really detailed and take sound very far for the sounds of cooking and not like fights and gunplay and car chases and stuff. You go really, really deep on like, okay, here's the braising section. Oh, here's the sauteing. Like go deep on something a little bit different. That was really, really, really fun. And the other two things I can't really talk about. That's the one. What are you working on next, Alex?
We can't talk about your favorite Sonic film?
Oh, my favorite one?
My favorite film of all time sound-wise.
Yeah, it's the conversation.
Oh, okay.
Final
I
word?
agree. It's hard to find a favorite.
Any final words, Bryan? Words of advice, whatever.
No, man, we covered it. That's pretty good.
Get good before you get fast.
Yeah, and just really listen. I mean, it's like, it's so easy to get tripped up on the gear. And like, look, I'm no stranger to gear. I mean, I have like a bunch of dope microphones and stuff in here, and I use them. But I listen back to the work. It's so easy. It's so easy to get stressed on deadlines and fixated on the equipment and the stuff and think
and
like
the rules, the settings rules.
Right. Yes. And go through the motions, and like you're not doing yourself or the work any favors if you're just going through the motions. Really, really listen. Like listen deep. Listen back and say like, I'm in charge of this, and this sounds good. That's what it is. Like that's it.
I like it.
And Alex, you have the honors.
Oh yes, we're currently finishing The Boys.
Hell yeah.
Season
Nice.
3, and I have another feature coming up, but I can't mention it just yet. A favorite film? I can't, just like Bryan, I could talk probably for hours about.
No, I meant
my
literally. It's the
favorites.
conversation from 1974.
Oh!
From Coppola's the cards.
That's hilarious. I really thought you said that's a conversation.
I mean,
for later.
It also
Hilarious.
is,
film,
but
the
or maybe it's just like that's. I just saw that in the theater recently.
Oh, you did? How did you see
Yeah,
it?
yeah. It played at Los Feliz 3,
Oh, yeah.
with like a
Was
fresh
it the
35
anniversary?
millimeter print. What's that?
Was it the anniversary of the film?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure the 74, so no significant anniversary there. But it's just like there's a fresh 35 millimeter print that looks really good and
Oh, nice.
it's pretty good. And like I'm just kind of a sucker. So like the movies that I've most recently seen in the theater, like just like emotionally resonate. I'm like, yeah, that's the one. You
Yeah.
know, and then more recently than that, I saw Everything Ever All at Once, and I was like, oh my god, this is the movie that's gonna save cinema. I'm just like I'm so um,
Um,
moved when I do actually get the chance to go to the cinema, which, as you might imagine, after I've sat staring at screens all day making movies, it's not the first thing I do every night. It's go out and spend time at a cinema, but I still find the experience very moving and social and wonderful, from my understanding of the work when I get a chance to.
I agree with that. It is hard. It's hard to go to the theater after work, but it's always worth it if we can, carve out a
Right.
day that we're not in the studio to go
So I give
sit
my
in the
favorite. What's your
environment.
favorite, Alex? You have to.
I can't do a favor. I'm gonna have to think about this more. It's gonna take me a couple of hours. So I'm gonna just share. There was a pivotal film in my decision to get into sound, which was Pan's Labyrinth,
Oh,
and
yeah, that's a good one.
That's a good sound movie.
it was a hugely impactful movie to me. That's when I started wondering who does this work and how can I do this work. And I was also particularly moved by that score as well. So I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that film sonically. And then what's left after that?
Final words.
Oh, final words. I guess my final words would be that if you're interested in sound, that it's best to think of yourself as an extension of the story department. We really are just a different way to support and tell a story, and I think it's good to think of it that way.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Alex and Bryan, for this wonderful, insightful conversation on sound. And thank you to you at home, wherever you are watching us from. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all the supporters and sponsors for the Atlanta Film Festival. I hope that you'll be able to catch more panels, films, just enjoy the festival. Let's enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.